So I'm here today with Martin Karlsson from Coordination.Network and Lateral. We are here at the DeSci London conference in 2024, and we are here to chat about all things coordination. So Martin, before we get into that, could you just give yourself a bit of an introduction and tell us more about what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very passionate about coordination, as the name of the Coordination Network implies. I have been working in understanding how to use machine learning to organize knowledge so that any individual can have access to the right information to take action towards something they believe in. And I've been on this journey for about 10 years. It's been a long journey, but now really a lot of pieces are coming together to enable what we saw was hinted as possible back then in terms of the state of machine learning and artificial intelligence today, and these new programmatic incentives that DeSci offers as a way to align communities.
Mm-hmm. And so what about the Coordination Network? What is it and how does it work, and how are projects in DeSci leveraging that?
Yeah, so the Coordination Network is really two things. We're developing an open source platform, which at its core is a way to store information and how to use that information so that you can have shared context around the paths to goals that you're trying to achieve, and be able to dive into any part of that path and understand what's the thing I can do to most effectively get us to that goal faster. And within DeSci and science more generally, it's all around, how do you gather evidence as quick as possible to be able to substantiate claims that are being made and understand your confidence level in the options that you have. And so the second piece of it is really this network layer that sits on top of that platform, where people who use that platform can then seamlessly share insights, observations, shared challenges in order to identify where they could pool resources to make progress faster.
Nice. And how did you arrive on this kind of solution? What problems did you identify? Who did you speak to? And where was the idea conceived?
Yeah, so, without going down to 10 years of history, originally there was the concept of effectively, with machine learning and very early vectorization techniques and small language models, I guess you could call them, you saw the opportunity to connect information semantically, essentially. And this helped bridge a lot of gaps that traditionally get in the way of people collaborating when they might speak different technical languages, or they might not even know quite what the question is to ask. And so that was really the impetus, was knowing that if you had a way to bridge those gaps effectively, you could dramatically increase the speed at which we could solve problems, because you get rid of that language barrier. Yeah. Fast forward to today, and what we saw on that 10-year journey was that the technology was one thing, but really the organizational structures and the incentive structures available were the critical piece to actually realize the use of that technology. And so I think I came across DeSci, I guess it's been 2 years now. It's kind of flew by. Wow. But what we saw was, here was a community with the values of openness and a new way to be able to create incentive structures that promoted that openness. And that was really a key moment where I saw, I see, if you bring this together, you have both the right organizational structures, incentive structures, and overall attitude to fully realize the gains that these technologies could have.
Yeah. And so walk us through how exactly it works. What does the platform look like? How do people interact with it? And where is it at today?
Yeah, so the open source platform's in development. The first open source repo we're aiming to have ready by the end of April, essentially. With a caveat that might shift a little bit, just to make that clear. But essentially what we've been doing up until then, we've been prototyping very rapidly. So we've been working with different organizations within DeSci, where it's really a very, if you come to the interface today, it'll look kind of like a mixture between a graph interface and a flow chart. Mm-hmm. And what it lets you do is basically bring in different nodes. So for example, if you were doing a lit review, you could bring all your papers, put them into nodes, and then you could essentially talk to them and work with them to synthesize information from the nodes that you have in the interface. But the next layer will allow you to, for example, zoom out to what I was speaking about before, of being able to layer basically the tech tree, the dependency, the research tasks into this basically multi-layered environment that connects all those dots, and then using LLMs makes it really easy to navigate across them.
Nice. And so what does that open up in terms of conducting science today, and where can that go in the future?
Yeah, so our goal is basically barrierless flow states, whereby you can come in, you can say, I have this idea, and you can immediately be presented with pathways to make that idea a reality. And that might look like either suggestions to other initiatives that might be along the same lines, the roadmaps that they have, for example, and how you could get involved there. Or if it's even more nascent, it could give you an idea of here are some adjacent examples where maybe these are the people to reach out to, or it might be suggesting here's some initial steps you can take to validate that idea without even involving anyone else. So it's really this very adaptive system. And a key thing to emphasize is that the platform itself is open source because we believe in partnering with great organizations like the different BioDAOs, like ValleyDAO, like AthenaDAO, like HairDAO, and so on, so that they can imbue it with their character. So our job is really to create as effective a platform as possible for people to come in and be able to adapt it to exactly their needs.
Awesome. And I know we've had a lot of back and forth over the last few months about this, but would love to hear for everybody that's watching and listening. How do you think about like AI agents and like even, we've had some crazy talks about removing humans entirely from that system. So would love to hear your thoughts around that and what that implies for society going forward.
Yeah, so my introduction slide at my presentation here at DeSci London was basically that we want to prevent a dystopian hellscape. And the reason I mention that is that with these technologies that are now becoming available, it matters a lot how we set up to make use of them and how we set up to govern them and how we set up to have oversight over them while being conscious of not wanting to limit their ability to deliver good for the society that we live in. And so our approach is really around maximizing transparency as to how these tools are being used. So for example, in the platform, if you ever use an LLM or an agent that's based on leveraging LLMs, you get an audit trail of everything that it's done. And via, for example, using tools like ComposeDB, you get a verifiable audit trail that's immutable of what that tool did. So what I think it's all about is understanding how you introduce these tools responsibly and give audit trails and transparency of how they're being used and for what purpose, while also not trying to impose legacy regulatory approaches that would inhibit their ability to deliver good, but rather understand what can these tools be used for in terms of facilitating oversight, for example. So I think it's really it's a balance that needs to be kept, and it needs to be an open dialogue to help bring stakeholders together to understand the benefit and then also understand the risks and mitigate those effectively.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on it earlier, but how do you see like organizational structures, whether those are BioDAOs or something entirely different, how do you see that relationship and the interface of that with the coordination network? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think we're moving into a world where things become a lot more organic. Like I know that in the space of coordination, some people bring up like mycelium networks and these different biological proxies for organic decentralized networks. And I think there's a lot to consider there of how you look at each individual who's trying to contribute to a cause or multiple causes, and how can you facilitate an environment where they can maximize their impact across the different initiatives that they might be interested in being involved in. So what I believe is that these technologies facilitate a much more organic and multidisciplinary, you could even say, environment where an individual has pathways to contribute and where the traditional context switching load that would have existed using traditional tools gets alleviated by the tool adapting whatever they need to be doing to the context of what they're trying to achieve as best facilitating their skill set. And this is where, from a DAO perspective, I think that allows for that. You know, you have a lot of people collaborating across different DAOs and bringing their expertise. So it's really putting that, already manifesting that world where if someone has a great way to solve a problem that's relevant for multiple different DAOs, facilitate that gets shared.
Yeah. No, this is the dream, right? Like this is what I always dreamed of as a scientist, was learning as much as I can about the world, about one subject, but also adjacent subjects, and then just applying it. But there's so many barriers right now to creating the impact that you want to see in the world and doing the science in the lab and publishing papers and all of that. So yeah, it's like what you guys are building is super exciting, and I'm personally really invested in it. And I think it's one of those platforms that, I see a lot of things in DeSci, but it's one of those platforms that really points to something that's universally applicable. and these are the kinds of tools that we need to leverage in DeSci, but not just DeSci as a niche movement, but science as a whole. And I can see already the benefits that this is going to have on society.
Yeah, so maybe to start with the point you just made around this type of platform being applicable to a lot of different scenarios. That's why we also really believe in the underlying technology being a public good as an open source platform, because we want to see these type of solutions facilitated and thrive as fast as possible. And what's great is, to your point on tokenization, is that this sets up the economic environment where that can be done sustainably and also aligned with the stakeholders' interests. So what we're working towards is essentially an environment where if the network helps facilitate solutions, that it can participate in a small way to the rewards that associate with those solutions being facilitated. And so tokenization makes that really possible in a way that would have been very difficult to achieve previously, because you have programmatic incentive layers where you can transparently set out the rules of engagement from day one, and have that be unlocked by certain parameters being met programmatically, rather than needing to involve a new legal team for every single engagement, for example. So I really see tokens as an incentive layer that is very adaptable to the needs of the communities that come together around it, and that then allows for a platform like ours to adapt to whatever is the best structure for helping that community succeed, while also having a way for them to help support the community's success.
Yeah. And so we've taken kind of an optimistic perspective here, and I want to just flip that a little bit and have a look at some of the risks, and also what are some of the hurdles, what are the barriers to this vision of where we could be in science, and why are we not there now? Why are we not there today?
Yeah, so I mean, we've had a lot of conversations over the past month, so you've witnessed firsthand that it's a long iterative journey to figure out how these different pieces come together. So I think on the hurdles perspective, you have to get really digging into the details to understand where the nuance lies for actually solving for the needs of the stakeholders involved. High ideals are great as a motivating factor, but in the end, you need to bring the principles of how to create products that solve people's problems. It can sound very kind of cliche, but it's very true. If you want to break through the noise and actually have people use these tools, you need to really be considerate of how you solve the problems in the right order that brings them along that journey. So I think a key hurdle is having the time to figure that out.
Yeah.
And we've had to survive for a long time to go through several iterations to understand how those pieces come together. And it's accumulating a lot of specific detail on how that sticks together to make progress there. On the risk side, I think, in the end, in this environment, we're aspiring to bring together these technologies in a way that is beneficial to the communities that it support. And it's also, putting together, there's a lot of different organizations collaborating. So in a centralized scenario, it can be, one of the benefits of a centralized scenario is that you have less stakeholders, especially at an early stage. Luckily, the tools that we're building help facilitate managing that. But I do think there's a risk of kind of splintering at times, and it's a question of how to conduct that dance so that you allow this organic journey to take shape and collaborate, but also being cautious of the fact that if misalignment occurs, those pieces that connect the different organizations can be more fragile. So that's something to be very conscious of. But the good thing is it also puts the onus on each participant to try to aspire to maintaining them. So I think that's how that can be mitigated. As mentioned earlier, on the AI side, I think it's important to be very proactive in terms of understanding the consequences of using these tools in these spaces, and trying to have as open a dialogue of that and considering how to mitigate it. But linked to that, it's also important to say that there's a lot of hype and buzz in AI, and it's by no means the case that it can do everything that a lot of people say it can. So in the end, that's another balancing act, is just to be conscious of what it can and can't do, and transparent and honest about that, and navigating that journey and not over-promising essentially, but at the same time keeping people motivated and understanding where things are heading. So
Awesome. And taking a step back from the coordination problem, what more broadly in DeSci are you interested in, and what kind of piques your interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm so excited by, now we're already seeing kind of early output from kind of some of the early BioDAOs. And I think it's starting to putting, let's say, runs on the board, to, I guess, use some sort of American metaphor.
Yeah.
Seeing that starting to happen is so exciting. I mean, the fact that HairDAO has a shampoo, that's wild. And I know, in the end, I think the beauty of something like HairDAO is like they have a very targeted thing that they're trying to solve. And I think they set a lot of interesting examples for others to learn from that might be trying to solve things in more, let's say, broad areas. So I think it's very fun to see that starting to happen now from the early cohort. And I'm just really excited to see what comes out of the new DAOs that are forming around new problem sets, the conversations that they start, and the synergies across them, and how we can then start this momentum and acceleration effect of having that translatable learning throughout the community to make the next batch be even faster than the first one. Yeah.
And so we've talked about tools, but how do we bring the people here, and how do we bring the community and the network, the passionate people that are going to make this all happen?
Yeah, so I think this speaks to I think on the product side, this point of like solving problems that are immediately understandable to the audiences that we speak to. Being at events like DeSci London here at Imperial, speaking to scientists, making sure that what we're saying aligns with what they are looking for, and making sure that we listen to the problem sets that people raise and really dive into the detail to understand how to best bring forth our message to that audience, so that they can come on board and quickly feel this kind of joyful sense that I think both of us have experienced.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always. So thank you for coming and chatting to us today. And to anyone that's watching at home, please join the community if you want to hear more about what these guys are building and what the whole of the decentralized space is building. So there's a Telegram channel, there's a YouTube channel as well, and head over to the website for more information.